January 29, 1945. Holtzheim, Belgium. Snow lay thick on the frozen ground, broken only by boot prints, shattered wood, and dark stains where fighting had passed moments earlier. Smoke drifted between ruined farmhouses. The wind carried the distant echo of gunfire and the sharp smell of burned powder. First Sergeant Leonard Funk rounded the corner of a farmhouse and stopped cold. 90 German soldiers stood before him. Some already held rifles and submachine guns. Others were grabbing weapons from a pile on the ground. 4 American soldiers knelt helplessly in the snow, their hands locked behind their heads. These Germans had been prisoners only 20 minutes earlier, captured during the fierce assault on the village. Now they were free, armed, and preparing to strike Funk's company from behind. A German officer rushed forward and slammed the barrel of an MP-40 into Funk's stomach. He shouted angrily in German. Funk didn't understand a single word. The officer screamed again, louder, his face turning red with rage. Funk looked at the officer. He looked at the 90 armed men. He looked at his captured soldiers. The situation was hopeless. Then Funk began to laugh. The officer froze in confusion. Funk laughed harder. What happened next would earn Leonard Funk the Medal of Honor. But this moment had been shaped by a lifetime of quiet strength, responsibility, and courage. Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. was born on August 27, 1916, in Braddock Township, Pennsylvania, a tough steel town near Pittsburgh. Smokestacks filled the sky, and factories lined the Monongahela River. The air smelled of coal dust and hot metal. Life was hard, and people learned early that nothing came easy. Funk grew up fast. His family struggled like many others during the Great Depression. By the time he finished high school in 1934, he had already been helping raise his younger brother. College was a dream few could afford. Work meant survival, not ambition. Funk took responsibility seriously and developed a calm, steady personality that people trusted. In June 1941, as war spread across Europe and Asia, the United States expanded the military draft. Funk's number was called. At 24 years old, 5 feet 5 inches tall, and weighing about 140 pounds, he didn't look like a warrior. Many might have expected him to serve in a safe clerical job. Instead, Funk volunteered for the Paratroopers. At that time, airborne forces were still new and dangerous. Jumping out of airplanes into enemy territory sounded like madness to most soldiers. Paratroopers were expected to land surrounded, fight outnumbered, and survive on courage and skill alone. Only the toughest men applied. Training was brutal. Endless running, climbing, falling, and physical punishment pushed recruits beyond their limits. Many quit or failed. Then came the jump towers, followed by real aircraft. The first time stepping into open air thousands of feet above the ground tested every nerve in the body. Fear screamed for survival. Funk stepped out anyway. He earned his jump wings and was assigned to Company C, 508th Parachute Infantry Regiment. In late 1943, his unit shipped to England and joined the famous 82nd Airborne Division, veterans of hard fighting in Sicily and Italy. Funk was older than most paratroopers, but his maturity, discipline, and quiet leadership earned respect quickly. By the time preparations for the invasion of France were complete, Funk was already a squad leader. June 6, 1944. Just after midnight, Funk stood inside a shaking C-47 aircraft loaded with paratroopers and equipment. German anti-aircraft fire exploded outside, rocking the plane. The aircraft flew dangerously low, but climbing higher meant becoming an easy target. Each man carried nearly 60 pounds of weapons, ammunition, and supplies. The green jump light flashed. Funk leapt into the dark sky. The wind slammed into him like a wall. Then the parachute opened, and the roar faded into an eerie silence. Below him lay occupied France, filled with enemy soldiers. The airborne invasion quickly turned chaotic. Planes scattered across miles of countryside. Some paratroopers drowned in flooded fields. Others landed directly among German units, and were killed instantly. Funk landed hard and twisted his ankle badly. Pain shot through his leg, but he stood up, buried his parachute, and moved forward. He was more than 40 miles from his intended drop zone, completely alone in enemy territory. Within hours, Funk began gathering lost paratroopers. Men from different units, confused and scattered, slowly formed around his calm leadership. Eventually, 18 soldiers followed him. Despite his injured ankle, Funk insisted on walking point, placing himself in the most dangerous position to protect his men. For 10 days, they traveled through German-occupied territory. They moved at night, hid during the day, and fought only when necessary. Hunger, exhaustion, fear, and pain followed them constantly. Yet Funk never lost control. Every man survived. They crossed 40 miles of enemy land and safely rejoined Allied forces. Funk received the Silver Star and a Bronze Star for this incredible leadership. But the war continued. In September 1944, the Allies launched Operation Market Garden in the Netherlands, the largest airborne assault in history. Thousands of paratroopers dropped behind enemy lines to seize bridges and open a path into Germany. The plan was bold and dangerous. Funk's unit landed successfully and began securing objectives. During the operation, Funk noticed something critical. 3 German anti-aircraft guns were firing directly at incoming Allied gliders. These gliders carried troops, vehicles, and supplies. If the guns continued firing, many soldiers would die before touching the ground. The gun position was heavily defended by about 20 German soldiers. Funk had only 3 men with him. Military doctrine said attacking such a position was suicide. Funk attacked anyway. Leading from the front, Funk and his small team charged the gun emplacement, killed the defenders, and destroyed all 3 guns. The gliders landed safely. For this act of bravery, Funk received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest American award for valor. By the winter of 1944, the Germans launched their final desperate counterattack, the Battle of the Bulge. Bitter cold swept across the forests of Belgium and Luxembourg. Snow buried the roads. Men froze in their foxholes. Equipment failed in the freezing temperatures. Casualties climbed into the tens of thousands. Then came the Normandy massacre. German SS troops murdered 84 American prisoners after they had surrendered. The news spread quickly among American soldiers. Trust vanished. Fury replaced mercy. When Funk heard what had happened, something hardened inside him. He made a silent decision. He would never surrender to the Germans. That decision would soon place him face to face with 90 armed enemy soldiers in a frozen Belgian village, laughing when death stared him in the face. September 17, 1944. The skies over the Netherlands filled with the thunder of aircraft engines. Thousands of Allied planes roared eastward, towing gliders packed with soldiers, jeeps, artillery, ammunition, and medical supplies. It was the beginning of Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne assault in history. More than 35,000 paratroopers would drop into enemy territory to seize bridges and open a highway straight into Germany. The plan was bold, fast, and dangerous. If everything worked perfectly, the war in Europe might be over by Christmas. If anything went wrong, thousands of men would die behind enemy lines. Leonard Funk did not know the grand strategy. He knew only his orders: jump, secure the landing zone, eliminate enemy resistance, and hold until ground forces arrived. Funk and company descended into Dutch fields under clear skies. Unlike the chaos of Normandy, the drop itself went smoothly. The men assembled quickly and moved toward their objectives. Houses, roads, canals, and narrow fields created natural choke points where German resistance could appear at any moment. Funk moved with calm precision, checking sectors, keeping his men focused and alert. Then Funk noticed something that didn't belong in the plan. 3 German 20mm anti-aircraft guns were firing continuously at incoming Allied gliders. Each glider carried dozens of soldiers and vital equipment. Every burst of fire meant more dead men before they ever touched the ground. Smoke rose from crashed gliders in the distance. Funk understood instantly. Those guns had to be silenced. The problem was numbers. The gun position sat on high ground, protected by sandbags and camouflage nets. About 20 German soldiers guarded the site. Funk had only 3 men with him. Standard military doctrine said a force should outnumber defenders at least 3 to 1 to attack a fortified position. Funk was outnumbered nearly 7 to 1. He attacked anyway. Leading from the front, Funk charged uphill through open ground. Bullets snapped past them. Dote exploded around their boots. Funk threw grenades into the first gun pit, killing the crew. His men followed, firing at close range. They rushed the second gun, eliminating its crew before it could swing its barrel. The third gun tried to rotate toward them, but Funk's team overwhelmed it in seconds. The firing stopped. Below them, gliders landed safely instead of burning in wreckage. Hundreds of lives were saved by the decision of 4 men who refused to hesitate. Funk received the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest American award for bravery. But the war was far from finished. By December 1944, the weather turned bitter and unforgiving. Snowstorms buried roads. Temperatures plunged below freezing. Men fought frostbite as fiercely as enemy soldiers. Then, without warning, German forces launched a massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes forest. 3 German armies smashed into thin American lines. Tanks rolled through frozen villages. Artillery thundered day and night. Entire units were overrun or forced to retreat. The front line bulged deep into Allied territory, giving the battle its name, the Battle of the Bulge. American soldiers fought in brutal conditions. Weapons jammed from ice. Vehicles refused to start. Men froze in foxholes and barns. Supply lines struggled through snow-choked roads. On December 17, 1944, tragedy struck near the crossroads town of Normandy. A convoy of American troops was captured by German SS forces. After surrendering, 84 unarmed Americans were machine-gunned in a frozen field. Some survived by pretending to be dead and crawling away after nightfall. The news spread like wildfire through the Allied lines. The massacre shattered any remaining trust. Many soldiers swore they would never surrender to SS units. For Leonard Funk, the news cut deep. He had seen enough death already. But this was murder, not combat. Inside himself, Funk made a simple decision. He would never surrender to the Germans. That promise would soon shape his destiny. By late January 1945, Allied forces had pushed the Germans back. Company C of the 508th Parachute Infantry received orders to capture the Belgian village of Holtzheim. The village sat along key roads and needed to be cleared quickly. The problem was manpower. The company had suffered losses. Their executive officer had been killed. Funk now served as acting executive officer. The unit was short on trained infantry. Funk solved the problem in an unusual way. He walked into company headquarters and addressed clerks, cooks, drivers, and supply personnel, men who normally worked far from combat. "You're infantry now," Funk told them. "Grab your weapons. We're taking that village." He formed a makeshift platoon of 30 men. Most had basic training but little real combat experience. Funk trained them quickly, organized them tightly, and led them personally. The march to Holtzheim was brutal. 15 miles through deep snow, freezing winds cutting through their clothing. German artillery shells exploded nearby, sending fountains of snow into the air. Some men stumbled from exhaustion. Funk pushed them forward, setting the pace, never asking them to do anything he wouldn't do himself. When they reached the village, Funk organized the assault. House by house, room by room, they cleared German positions. Rifle fire echoed in narrow streets. Grenades blasted through doorways. One by one, German defenders surrendered or fled. By the end of the fighting, Funk's improvised platoon had captured 30 prisoners without losing a single man. Another American unit captured 50 more Germans on the far side of the village. 80 prisoners total. They were gathered in the yard of a farmhouse, exhausted, cold, and disarmed. Funk looked at his men. They were tired, hungry, and still needed elsewhere in the village. He could spare only 4 soldiers to guard the prisoners. "Hold them here," Funk ordered. "We'll send more guards as soon as we can." Then Funk returned to the fight, unaware of what was unfolding behind him. While Funk continued clearing the village, a German patrol approached the farmhouse, 10 or more soldiers wearing white winter camouflage. In the swirling snow, they resembled American troops. The 4 guards realized the danger too late. The Germans overwhelmed them, disarmed them, and forced them to their knees. Then they freed the prisoners. Suddenly, 90 German soldiers stood armed in the farmhouse yard. They moved quickly and efficiently. Weapons were distributed. Machine guns were positioned. The plan was clear: strike Company C from behind while the Americans were scattered throughout the village. The German officer in charge began issuing orders. That was the moment Leonard Funk walked around the corner of the farmhouse. He had come to check on the prisoners and the guards, a routine inspection. He was not expecting to face 90 armed enemy soldiers. The German officer saw Funk immediately. The rank stripes on his sleeve marked him as a leader. The officer stormed forward and shoved an MP-40 into Funk's stomach, screaming commands in German. Funk didn't understand him. The officer screamed louder. Funk looked around. 90 Germans. 4 captured Americans. 1 weapon pressed into his gut. There was no escape. Then Funk began to laugh. And everything changed. The German officer's face tightened with anger as Leonard Funk laughed in front of him. Snow swirled in the cold wind. 90 German soldiers stood alert, rifles ready, their breath forming white clouds in the frozen air. 4 American soldiers remained on their knees, disarmed and helpless. The MP-40 pressed firmly into Funk's stomach. The officer shouted again in German, louder and more furious than before. His face flushed red. Veins bulged along his neck. To him, this American sergeant was mocking authority, mocking death itself. Funk could not understand a single word. But he understood tone, body language, and danger. He also remembered Normandy, the frozen field, the murdered prisoners, the broken rules of war. He had promised himself he would never surrender. Yet the laughter kept coming. It wasn't planned. It simply happened. Something about the absurdity of the moment broke through the tension in his mind. A screaming officer. A gun jammed into his stomach. 90 enemies waiting for obedience. His own men kneeling in the snow. Funk laughed harder. Some of the German soldiers exchanged confused looks. A few even smirked nervously. This was not how prisoners behaved. They expected fear, begging, pleading. They did not expect laughter. The officer screamed again, now nearly shaking with rage. He gestured violently toward Funk's weapon, clearly ordering him to surrender it. Funk nodded slightly, still laughing. Slowly, deliberately, he reached for the strap of his Thompson submachine gun slung over his shoulder. His movements were careful, relaxed, almost casual, exactly what a man would do when complying with orders. The German officer watched closely. His posture relaxed just a fraction. The American was finally obeying. That fraction of a second was all Funk needed. In one lightning-fast motion, Funk swung the Thompson forward, aligned the muzzle with the officer's chest, and pulled the trigger. The weapon roared to life. .45 caliber bullets tore into the officer at point-blank range. The force threw the man backward. He collapsed into the snow before his body even understood it was dead. Funk did not hesitate. He pivoted, spraying bullets into the tightly packed cluster of German soldiers nearest to him. Men screamed. Blood splashed against white snow. Rifles fell from lifeless hands. Shock rippled through the formation. 30 rounds emptied from the magazine in seconds. Click. The gun went silent. This was the deadliest moment. 90 armed Germans could kill one man instantly if they reacted together. Funk moved without thinking. Muscle memory took over. He ripped the empty magazine free, slammed a fresh one into the receiver, pulled the bolt, and resumed firing, all in less than 2 seconds. At the same time, Funk shouted at the top of his lungs. Grab their weapons. Grab their weapons. The 4 captured Americans reacted instantly. They lunged for rifles dropped by dead or wounded Germans. Moments ago they were prisoners. Now they were armed fighters again. The Germans were in chaos. Their commanding officer was dead. No one had given new orders. Some tried to fire back. Bullets cracked through the air. Snow exploded around Funk's boots. One American soldier, standing near Funk, was struck and killed instantly. Funk kept moving, firing in controlled bursts. He shifted positions, preventing the Germans from forming a firing line. His men added their fire, creating deadly crossfire in the tight space of the farmhouse yard. The shock factor was overwhelming. What should have been an easy capture had turned into a sudden slaughter. The Germans had been relaxed, confident, unprepared for immediate violence. Within 60 seconds, the fight was over. 21 German soldiers lay dead in the snow. 24 more were wounded. The rest, more than 40 men, threw down their weapons and raised their hands in surrender. Panic replaced discipline. Silence fell. Smoke drifted from Funk's Thompson. The snow was stained dark red. Bodies lay scattered around the yard. Funk stood breathing heavily, adrenaline pounding in his ears. He looked at his men, still alive, still standing. "That," Funk muttered, almost calmly, "was the stupidest thing I've ever seen." Word of the incident spread quickly through Company C. Soldiers shook their heads in disbelief. A single sergeant had faced 90 armed enemies and won. The story moved through the regiment and eventually through the entire 82nd Airborne Division. The laughing sergeant became a living legend. To Funk, it was simply survival. The remaining German prisoners were marched to the rear under heavy guard. This time, no chances were taken. Company C secured Holtzheim completely, eliminating remaining resistance in the village. Funk wrote his report. Just another firefight. Another strange moment in a long war. But higher command recognized the extraordinary nature of what had happened. A recommendation for the Medal of Honor moved up the chain of command. Officers who reviewed the report could hardly believe it, but every witness confirmed the same story. Outnumbered 90-1. A gun pressed into his stomach. Instead of surrendering, Funk attacked. The official citation would later describe how he pretended to comply, then struck with lightning speed, killing the enemy officer, and rallying his men to seize weapons and counterattack. On September 5, 1945, Leonard Funk stood in the White House Rose Garden. President Harry S. Truman placed the Medal of Honor around his neck. "I would rather have this medal," Truman said, "than be President of the United States." Funk stood quietly, uncomfortable with attention. He was not a man who sought praise. He accepted the medal politely and returned to duty shortly afterward. His list of decorations was staggering. Medal of Honor for Holtzheim. Distinguished Service Cross for the anti-aircraft guns in Holland. Silver Star for leading 18 men across 40 miles of enemy territory in Normandy. Bronze Star. 3 Purple Hearts. Foreign awards from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. By the end of the war, Leonard Funk was the most decorated paratrooper of World War II. Yet fame never changed him. When the war ended, Funk returned to Pennsylvania. He married Gertrude. They raised 2 daughters. He took a job with the Veterans Administration, helping other veterans navigate paperwork, benefits, and medical claims. Quiet work. Honest work. For 27 years, Funk served other soldiers in civilian life. He rose steadily through the organization and eventually became a division chief in the Pittsburgh Regional Office. He never bragged about the war. He never wrote a book. He rarely spoke about Holtzheim. When people asked him about the famous incident, he simply shrugged. "I did what I had to do." That was all he ever said. But his story was not finished. Time passed. The years softened the scars, but not the memories. Funk remained humble, steady, reliable, the same man he had always been. On November 20, 1992, Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. died of cancer at the age of 76. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery among the nation's heroes. His name lives on, in military buildings, highways, and memorials. Yet many people still do not know his story. The short man from a steel town who laughed in the face of death. The war in Europe ended only a few months after the snow-covered chaos at Holtzheim. Germany collapsed in May 1945. Cities lay in ruins. Millions of soldiers and civilians were dead. For the men who survived, the sudden silence after years of constant danger felt strange, almost unreal. Leonard Funk returned to duty like any other soldier. He did not seek attention. He did not tell stories. To him, Holtzheim was not legend. It was simply a moment when survival demanded action. But the army thought differently. Reports of the incident moved steadily through headquarters. Officers examined witness statements, battle reports, and medical records. Every version told the same story. One American sergeant, facing 90 armed enemies, pretended to surrender, killed the German officer at point-blank range, rallied his captured men, and turned certain death into victory. The recommendation for the Medal of Honor reached Washington without hesitation. On September 5, 1945, Leonard Funk stood in the White House Rose Garden. He wore a freshly pressed uniform, medals shining in the sunlight. President Harry S. Truman stepped forward and placed the blue ribbon around Funk's neck. Truman shook his hand firmly and said words that would become famous. "I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States." For Truman, who had just guided the nation through the end of the most destructive war in history, this was no empty compliment. He understood the weight of courage required when death stands inches away. Funk nodded politely. He was uncomfortable in front of cameras and crowds. Applause embarrassed him more than enemy gunfire ever had. When reporters asked him what he had felt at Holtzheim, Funk offered no dramatic speeches. "I did what I had to do," he said simply. By the end of the war, Funk's record was extraordinary. A Medal of Honor, Holtzheim, Belgium. Distinguished Service Cross, assault on anti-aircraft guns in Holland. A Silver Star, leading 18 men through enemy territory in Normandy. Bronze Star, meritorious service. 3 Purple Hearts, wounded 3 times. A foreign decorations from France, Belgium, and the Netherlands. Few soldiers in American history had earned so many high decorations. Many who earned even one became famous heroes. Funk never tried. He returned home to Pennsylvania. The same steel towns, the same working-class streets, the same quiet routines. He married Gertrude. They built a modest life and raised 2 daughters. He took a job with the Veterans Administration, helping former soldiers file claims, receive medical care, and navigate government paperwork. Day after day, Funk sat behind a desk, guiding other veterans through systems that often felt confusing and frustrating. He listened patiently to stories of pain, injury, and lost friends. In many ways, it was a continuation of his wartime leadership, helping people survive and move forward. He worked there for 27 years. Co-workers respected him, but rarely knew the full extent of his wartime heroism. Funk never brought attention to himself. His medals stayed stored away. He did not hang them on walls. He did not tell war stories at parties. When people learned about his past and asked questions, he answered briefly and changed the subject. To Funk, heroism was not something to celebrate. It was something that simply happened when responsibility demanded it. As decades passed, the world changed. New wars came and went. New generations grew up knowing World War II only from books and documentaries. Many legendary soldiers became names in history textbooks. Leonard Funk remained mostly unknown outside military circles. He lived quietly in McKeesport, Pennsylvania. Neighbors saw him as a polite, soft-spoken man who took care of his lawn and greeted people kindly. Few realized they were speaking with one of the most decorated paratroopers in American history. In November 1992, Leonard Alfred Funk Jr. passed away after a battle with cancer. He was 76 years old. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery, among the nation's honored dead. His grave lies quietly among thousands of white stones, a simple marker for a man who once faced 90 enemies without hesitation. Over time, small memorials began to appear. A fitness center at Fort Bragg, now Fort Liberty, was named in his honor. A highway in Pennsylvania carries his name. A post office in McKeesport was dedicated to him in 2023. Slowly, his story resurfaced. Yet even today, many people still do not recognize the name Leonard Funk. They know Audie Murphy. They know Alvin York. They know the famous heroes whose stories filled movies and books. But Funk's courage lived quietly, without publicity, without self-promotion. What makes Leonard Funk's story so powerful is not just the gunfight, it is the mindset behind it. At Holtzheim, Funk had every logical reason to surrender. 90 men. A gun pressed into his stomach. His soldiers already captured. Survival mathematics said surrender was the only option. But Funk wasn't thinking about numbers. He was thinking about Normandy, about prisoners murdered in cold blood. He was thinking about his men kneeling helplessly in the snow. He was thinking about the scattered soldiers across the village who would be ambushed from behind if these Germans escaped. He understood something deeper than fear. Responsibility does not disappear when odds turn impossible. So he laughed. Whether the laughter came from stress, instinct, or strategy may never be fully known. But in those seconds of confusion, Funk created an opening and acted without hesitation. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is action when fear is overwhelming. President Truman understood this when he placed the medal around Funk's neck. Power, rank, and titles do not compare to the moment when a person chooses action over surrender. Truman once commanded armies. Funk once stood alone with a gun pressed into his body and chose to fight anyway. History remembers presidents, but humanity remembers courage. Time has a way of erasing names, even heroic ones. Wars end. Generations pass. New struggles replace old memories. But some moments in history remain timeless because they reveal something true about human courage. Leonard Funk's moment came in a frozen Belgian farmyard, with 90 enemy soldiers surrounding him and a gun pressed into his stomach. He did not look like a hero. He was not tall or physically imposing. He did not shout speeches or demand attention. He simply refused to surrender to fear. Many people imagine courage as strength, aggression, or fearlessness. Movies show heroes charging forward without hesitation or doubt. Real courage is quieter. It appears when the mind continues to function while the body wants to freeze. Funk's laughter may have seemed strange, even ridiculous, but it revealed something deeply human. Under unbearable stress, the brain sometimes chooses an unexpected path, humor, disbelief, even calm, as a shield against terror. Whether intentional or instinctive, that laughter disrupted the enemy's expectations. It created confusion. It broke the rhythm of command. And in war, even a few seconds of confusion can decide life or death. Funk did not wait for perfect conditions. He did not seek backup. He did not negotiate. When opportunity appeared, he acted with speed, precision, and absolute commitment. He trusted his training. He trusted his instincts. He trusted his responsibility to the men around him. That trust saved lives. After the war, Funk never tried to define himself by medals or stories. He returned to ordinary life, working in an office, raising a family, paying bills, helping other veterans navigate paperwork and benefits. The same discipline and patience that carried him through battle carried him through civilian life. He understood something many heroes struggle to accept. Life is not meant to be lived in glory. It is meant to be lived in service. Day after day, Funk helped men who carried invisible scars, wounds of memory, pain, and loss. He listened. He guided. He solved problems quietly. There were no cameras, no applause, no medals on the wall. Just steady, honest work. To Funk, this was enough. Years passed. The world changed rapidly. Technology transformed communication. Cities expanded. Children grew into adults. Wars became distant headlines instead of daily reality. Slowly, the faces of World War II faded from public memory. But courage does not expire. It waits quietly inside ordinary people. Leonard Funk's story reminds us that heroism is not reserved for famous names or powerful positions. It belongs to anyone willing to take responsibility when circumstances demand it, whether on a battlefield, in a workplace, or within a family. Most people will never face 90 armed enemies. But everyone faces moments where fear, pressure, or injustice demands a choice. Do you freeze? Do you surrender? Or do you act? Funk chose action. President Truman's words still echo. I would rather have this medal than be President of the United States. What Truman recognized was not just bravery, it was moral courage. The willingness to stand alone when surrender seems safer. The willingness to protect others even when personal survival is uncertain. Leadership is not rank. Leadership is responsibility in motion. Funk embodied that truth long before he ever received a medal. Today, Leonard Funk rests at Arlington National Cemetery, among thousands of soldiers who gave their lives or their youth to defend others. His grave is quiet. No loud monument announces his story. Only a name, a date, and a record of service. Yet his legacy lives in the soldiers whose lives he saved in Normandy, the pilots and glider troops protected in Holland, the men rescued from execution at Holtzheim, the veterans he helped during decades of civilian service, the families who benefited from his steady dedication. These are victories that cannot be measured by headlines. Perhaps the greatest lesson from Leonard Funk's life is this: courage is not about being fearless. It is about being faithful to duty, to people, to values, even when fear is overwhelming. You do not need extraordinary size, power, or fame to make an extraordinary difference. Funk was small in stature, quiet in personality, and humble in spirit. But when the moment arrived, he stood taller than fear itself. War does not favor the reckless. It does not favor the strongest. It favors the ones who keep thinking, keep acting, and keep caring when chaos tries to take control. That is what Leonard Funk did, in 60 seconds that changed history.